And now it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Graney, moderator for our keynote event and fireside chat with Brad Smith. Michael Graney was recently named Deputy Commissioner of the West Virginia Department of Commerce by Governor Jim Justice. He had previously served as Executive Director of the West Virginia Development Office, a position he began in 2018. Prior to joining the Justice Administration, Mike spent much of his professional career in the petroleum industry, in co-founder or executive positions, and in those roles was responsible for managing different facets of the business, including acquisition, maintenance, construction, finance, administration, retail operations, and environmental compliance. From 1991 to 2015, he was president of One Stop, a convenience store chain based in West Virginia. He has been a member of numerous oil industry professional organizations, a member of the Governor's Natural Gas Vehicle Task Force, and he's active in many civic and philanthropic organizations. I am delighted to welcome Mike Graney to introduce Brad Smith and host our fireside chat with him. Thank you, Mike. And Brad, if you'll turn on your video as well, we'll go to our next segment.
Ann, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And yes, after that description, I still am a recovering entrepreneur, working as a state government employee for the last period of time. Wow, what an incredible pleasure it is for me to introduce Brad Smith. A true honor. And Brad, we're grateful to you for your time today and for everything you do for West Virginia. So let me do this. I think most of you don't really need this introduction, but I'll do it anyway. Brad D. Smith is the former CEO of Intuit and co-founder of the Wing to Wing Foundation. He currently serves as Intuit's executive chairman of the board of directors and is chairman of Nordstrom's board of directors and is a sitting member of the board of directors of SurveyMonkey. Smith led Intuit's transformation from a North American desktop software company to a global cloud-based product and platform company, proving himself as a capable leader, developing the necessary flexibility to thrive in today's tech landscape. By the conclusion of Brad's 11-year tenure as Intuit's CEO, he nearly doubled the company's revenue and increased its stock by more than 500%. Wow. While accumulating a robust list of annual Best Places to Work awards and other accolades. In 2018, Smith announced that he was leaving his CEO role at Intuit shortly after he co-founded the Wing to Wing Foundation with his wife, Elise. The organization's goal is to advance the great equalizers of education and entrepreneurships in regions where individuals and communities have been overlooked and underserved. In doing so, they strive to champion human dignity and unleash human potential. Smith received his BA in marketing from Marshall University in 1986, followed by his MA in leadership development from Aquinas College in 1991. Brad is a proud native of Canova, West Virginia, and he has never forgotten his roots. In fact, he has been at the forefront of creating change from the Prosperity Hub in Bluefield to the new Brad D. Smith Business Incubator in Huntington to remote worker attraction efforts at West Virginia University. Brad is working to help the state and its people realize our full potential. Brad, as said before, we appreciate everything you do and thank you for being with us today. I have a number of questions, but this is your fireside chat. So I'll ask an opening question and then you take it from there. And when you're ready for another question, ask me and I'll prompt you with one.
Okay.
So here's the first question. You are a champion for West Virginia, and we really appreciate it. You believe West Virginia is well positioned for entrepreneurial growth, and you have talked about the need for us as a state to have a startup mentality. Would you mind explaining what you mean by that? Unpack that concept a little bit for us.
Happy to do that. Michael, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I want to thank Ann and the team for inviting me. I'm so excited about what you're doing today and tomorrow. And I love to see the momentum and I love to hear the enthusiasm and the upbeat outlook as we start to exit this great pandemic. And I'll begin with just the fact that I think West Virginia is poised for the next chapter of great. You hear a lot of conversations about this notion of becoming the startup state. And a lot of people believe in this. And when I say a lot of people, it's not just those in the state, it's those outside the state, those who've moved away and may potentially come back. And it's really rooted in a couple of things. First is, it is our best assets, which are our people and our natural resources, are perfectly aligned with 4 secular trends that are serving to be tailwinds and are actually shaping the future as we see it. Those 4 trends are, first of all, a lean into an entrepreneurial upstart activity. And so if you look at data, 75% of those who are coming out of school today don't want to work for another company. They want to start their own business. That is exactly the opposite of where it was when I graduated in 1986, where 80% of people wanted to go work for Microsoft or some large company like General Electric. So there's this entrepreneurial enthusiasm that's coming out of the school. And concurrent with that is our major education systems, K through 12, as well as colleges and universities, are leaning into entrepreneurial tracks, whether it's design thinking at Marshall University, or it's entrepreneurial courses and incubators at WVU, University of Charleston, and others. So we have this notion of there's a right generation of people who want to become entrepreneurs and an education system prepared to develop them. The second major trend is a lean towards experiential learning or design thinking. We all know that coming out of the invention of the iPhone in 2007, that something happened, and our scientists have studied the brains of young men and women who were born after 2007, and they've discovered some facts. The first fact is they're able to do something called continuous partial attention, which is the ability to do multiple things simultaneously with equal skill. That is a biological feat that's never been achieved in any other generation before them. We all learned how to multitask. And if you hook these nodes up to our brain, it goes red and green. But if you actually use the same technology on these younger brains, they run perpetually green, which means we have to learn to educate them differently. We can't lecture for 45 minutes and then give them a quiz and see if they memorized it. Instead, they have to learn by doing, which is why design thinking and things like the Science Adventure Camp at West Virginia University, where you get the ability to learn STEM through outdoor activities, is so important. The third major trend is remote work. And obviously going into the pandemic, this was already a reality. It was a secular trend where 23% of the S&P 500 employees were already permitted to work anywhere they wanted while staying fully employed in a company in the Silicon Valley or on Wall Street. Coming out of the pandemic, that number is now estimated to be closer to 37% who can live from anywhere. That's according to research from Upwork. And so when you see this happening, you see this talent saying, hey, I want to live in a place where I don't have a 1-hour commute. I can be surrounded by kind people in a community. I can go outdoors and go whitewater rapids, rafting or rock climbing. And this really puts West Virginia on the map. And that takes me to the fourth and final, which is rural is becoming the new urban. People want to be a part of communities where they can come in and help shape the community, become a part of its DNA and fabric, and create the next great Amazon or into it. So when you put all that together, we have amazing people, many of whom are obviously descendants of the mountaineers who learned how to blaze trails instead of follow paths. And now they're surrounded by an education system that's leaning into an entrepreneurial mindset. And the second is we have these beautiful resources that attract people who already have these skills to want to move to our state and be a part of our communities. You put that together and we're on the cusp of something similar to what happened in Ireland, which are our descendants, and they went through a tough period just as we have, and they've emerged the Celtic tiger, the fastest growing economy in all of Europe. Israel went through this, as did India and France, and of course our own neighbors in Pittsburgh and Detroit. So I really feel like the state is at the cusp now, which is why it's so important for us to lean in.
And I'm glad to see you recording this. That's fantastic. Thank you. So we have scores of West Virginia entrepreneurs who have joined us today, many of which have tech-focused or research-driven concepts they're working to move forward. What advice or words of wisdom would you offer them as they try to develop their concepts?
Yeah, I'll be happy to share this perspective, recognizing that many of the speakers before me have offered their points of view. These are trained professionals that do investment in venture capital, but I can speak to it from a Silicon Valley perspective, and also as someone who ran a company that during my 11 years as CEO, we did 116 acquisitions. and a couple dozen divestitures. So a lot of merger and acquisition activity or internal VC activity. And I'll start by saying that there is a big trend underway right now in the Silicon Valley venture capital community, and is they don't invest in business plans. They invest in people and in market evidence. In fact, one of the most popular books in the Silicon Valley is Getting to Plan B, written by Randy Komisar, because it documents and studies that 90% of all the original ideas that a startup entrepreneur comes in with to a VC actually fails. It's Plan B or Plan C that ultimately works, which is why it's so important for those who are starting out to recognize two things. One, you have to fall in love with the problem and not your solution. And that's where design thinking comes into play. And it's important to recognize there are multiple ways to solve a problem. But then the second is to apply succession metrics before you go ask for investment. And succession metrics have 4 toll gates. This is actually a codified process coming out of the best practices of the startups in the Valley that now have this unicorn status. The first is you want to prove a unit of 1 that you can achieve the love metrics. And the love metrics are 3 criteria. Does the solution actually deliver the benefit the customer was hoping to get? The second, is it so compelling that they're continuing to use this product even in your absence? That's called active use. And then the third is the word of mouth or viral growth happening without any paid marketing? That's a unit of 1. We call that product market fit. And it's ultimately the most important thing that any venture capitalist in the Silicon Valley is looking for. The second toll gate and succession metrics are to do the same thing with a group of cohorts, where you take the learning from the unit of 1 and you continue to make improvements to the product to see if you can improve customer benefit, increase active use, and accelerate word of mouth. It's only at this stage 2 that you even begin to ask yourself, and how will I make money? And that is where you start to run dry tests to see if customers will give a credit card or potentially agree to pay. So that's the second succession toll gate. The third toll gate is called market metrics. And this is where you want to put your solution out in the market and compare the win-loss ratio to the second and third best alternatives. And what you're tracking here is the ability to win market share or more yeses on a sales call. It's also the part where you want to test if you're able to get monetization and you're able to improve your marginal contribution for every unit sold. In other words, your LTV to CAC, lifetime value divided by cost to acquire a customer. That should be moving up and to the right with every unit you sell. Then you go to the fourth, which is the financial projections, revenue and profit. That's usually what's captured in a business case. And this is where I'm hoping, as we get more entrepreneurial training in our schools, that we break this notion of the first thing you have as a business case. That's actually the last thing you have. The first thing you have is a clear understanding of the problem, a series of hypotheses of how to actually solve that problem. You run rapid experiments through the succession metrics, prove you can find a way to make money, and then write a business plan. So I know, Michael, that was a long-winded answer, but that's sort of what I see happening right now. And my coaching to those who are in startups are, don't spend so much time on a business plan, get busy in the market, falling in love with the problem, running experiments and getting in-market evidence, which investors will then de-risk their investment if they see it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, it sort of answers the next question, but it might actually be worth spending a little bit more time on this. So what came first, the entrepreneur or their big idea? And, you know, a lot of people think entrepreneurship is sort of the chicken or the egg scenario, meaning they want to be an entrepreneur, they want to start their own business, but they don't necessarily have that big idea. And they might not necessarily have really the fire in their belly that they need to, you know, they need to really put it all in, shove it all in. Yeah. So what thoughts do you have about actually developing those types of resources, that type of entrepreneurial training, that curriculum at, you know, WVU, Marshall, UC, any of the state universities that are offering entrepreneurial tracks?
Yeah, Michael, this is an important notion, and I did allude to it in my prior answer, but honestly, every person needs to have entrepreneurial training. If you want to go to work for Microsoft or Facebook or Amazon or Intuit or Google or any of the other companies, they're now looking for entrepreneurial skills, also known as critical thinking skills or design thinking, in every employee. In fact, at Intuit, we give all of our employees 10% unstructured time to work on any problem they think they can solve for a customer, or to look at how our work gets done and find different ways to be more productive so they and their fellow employees can get more done with less effort. And so we train all 11,000 employees on design thinking. They're challenged to run experiments. We have 1,800 experiments happening inside the company today as we speak. And last year we had $400 million in new revenue that came from ideas that was never made by the CEO. No decision was made by the CEO. It was actually developed by the employees. So it is mission critical to do that. And then the second thing I would say is there is this notion of, I can't start a business because I don't have an idea. And as I just shared, that's the last thing that most entrepreneurs start with. When you talk to an entrepreneur, many times they're accidental entrepreneurs. Our founder, Scott Cook, was working for Procter & Gamble when he watched his wife struggle to balance the checkbook back when we used to have to do that before the internet. And that gave him an idea to use something called a personal computer. And he developed a product called Quicken with a student engineer from Stanford. Scott never wrote a line of code himself. He found an engineer to write it. And of course, the rest is history. So I think it's important just to recognize we all need to develop these entrepreneurial skills, whether we want to work for a company or start our own. And if we want to start our own, simply look around at the problems that you see in the world or in your life that aren't getting solved well by an existing solution and begin to think about ways that you could come up with a better way of doing it. That's how some of the greatest companies are created.
Brad, fantastic. Thank you again. So I've heard you speak about this before, but living through this unbelievable disruption that we've just found ourselves live through in the last 12 months, what do you see for the economy, not only the West Virginia economy, the nation's economy, but the world economy, both in the short and the long term? You've talked about that a little bit, but let's unpack it a little bit more.
Yeah, sure, Michael. I think if you look back over history at any market disruption, I'll use the more recent ones that I've lived through. So I obviously lived through Y2K and 9/11 and then the great financial meltdown in 2008, 2009. You fast forward to the pandemic. What tends to happen is secular trends that were already underway get accelerated by 3 to 5 years. And so there are secular trends that are getting accelerated today. We've all experienced them in our life. There are 3 in particular I would call out. One is the digitization of service, whether it's a doctor and a patient with telemedicine, it's a teacher and a student with distance learning, it's the ability to have your taxes done with an accountant with TurboTax Live, and the list goes on. It's how do you bring together AI and human expertise to basically get something done with less friction. The second secular trend that got accelerated is the digitization of commerce. Omni-channel retail, buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, all those things are coming together, and retailers now need to be able to do all the above, not just come and eat at my restaurant, but actually have it delivered to your home as well. And then the third major trend that's getting accelerated is remote work, which I spoke to a few minutes ago. So those are 3 things that are happening. Now, what's also happening as a result of this pandemic is there's a reinforcement of a foundational capability that I think West Virginia is uniquely poised to help solve, and that is cybersecurity, data, and privacy. Because these things have become even more important as more employees be able to work from home. And you have to be able to protect the data and protect the edge of that computing perimeter. And then there are some fundamental shifts that are happening that I think are the disruptive emergent technologies that we're all starting to deal with, but I think are going to become key accelerators going forward. The first is artificial intelligence. I'm going to quote the famous data science joke, which is, what's the difference between AI and ML? AI is written in PowerPoint. Machine learning is written in Python, which is a coding language. So what that basically means is AI is often overhyped. So when I talk about artificial intelligence, I think of machine learning, knowledge engineering, and natural language processing. That's going to become such a key part of all kinds of startup opportunities coming out. The second opportunity is edge computing and the Internet of Things. Clearly sensors, robotics, those things are becoming increasingly important. The third was talked about by the earlier speaker, Larry, and it's bio. So it's biotech, whether it's pharma, agriculture, sustainable farming. And then the fourth is 5G. So when you put that together, I think we're on the cusp of a disruptive entrepreneurial boom with a whole bunch of new ways of solving things. And this is where I think we have to challenge our mindset to not think about reopen, but think about reimagination. And if you look at history, this is one of the most explosive periods of growth coming out of a market disruption. And it's a great time to start a business.
This last 2.5 years has been fascinating for me because I've learned so much about West Virginia. I've learned a lot about a lot of stuff. And you don't know what you don't know until you start learning some stuff. So it's been really interesting. And, West Virginia has a diversified economy. Really, we just need more of it. And obviously, we've been pleased with the successes that we've seen in the past several months with diversifying our economy. But what do you think maybe is the greatest risk facing West Virginia as we work to grow that economy and diversify?
Yeah, I think it's a risk that we as individuals face. It's a natural human trait, but it's this thing to say, why would I think this is possible? And one of the things I learned early in my career as I moved through 10 states, I left West Virginia after Marshall to find a job and ultimately moved throughout the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, and then the West Coast. Is when I got to the Silicon Valley, they don't ask why is it possible, they ask why not. And I think what we have to do is have a willing suspension of disbelief. We've been dealt a lot of tough cards over a lot of years in West Virginia. And sometimes it causes us to be skeptical, cynical, or perhaps not believing that it's possible. And I think what we have to be willing to do is just lean into the wind, apply these new techniques, and be recognizing the fact that not everything's going to be successful. Get up, dust yourself off, and go again. The best way to do that is to study the best wheel makers, those who've already run the experiment you plan to run. So when I talk about West Virginia and the ability for us to reemerge from a very tough chapter in our state's history, I look to Ireland, who had exactly the same situation we did 3 decades ago. They were suffering a lot of industrial flight. The youth were leaving the country. They were suffering addictions. They pulled back. They studied the best traits of others, and then they reimagined themselves, and now they're the Celtic Tiger. And West Virginia has been doing the same, but I think we just have to be willing to recognize it's not about why is it possible, it's why not. And then lean into the optimistic views of let's go learn from the best of others and let's apply that right here in West Virginia. I think that's our biggest opportunity.
You said that so incredibly well, and I cannot disagree, cannot agree with you more on every point, and you said it very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
So shifting just a little bit, I know you've been spending a lot of time working on this, and we're very appreciative of what you've been doing. How do we go about informing the rest of the country about the benefits of West Virginia, and that if you do your job can do your job from anywhere, there's no better place than West Virginia?
Yeah, Michael, the neat thing about this is West Virginia is more about do versus say. We like to just let our actions speak for louder than words. And if you take a look at some things that are happening, we've held multiple business model competitions, innovation competitions, Shark Tank events, and we take the winners from those different schools and we fly them out to the Silicon Valley, and I will host them out here and take them to Facebook and Google and Intuit and other companies where they get to meet the senior leaders and the founders of those companies. And every time we've had the chance to do that, when the students fly back home, my peers will call me and say, Brad, where do we find more students like that? I've never seen such raw ingenuity and this grittiness and willingness to get up and dust themselves off. And their creativity is amazing. And I said, follow me. I'll show you where they are. They've learned how to overcome obstacles every single day of their life. And they are amazing and they're resilient. And then companies like Intuit say, well, let's go in and open up a facility in Bluefield, West Virginia. Or we opened one in Hazard, Kentucky, and Wise, Virginia, Johnstown, Pennsylvania. These are communities that used to be coal mining communities. And we said, no, let's show you they can participate in the 21st century. So we opened up this facility in Bluefield. We have 33 locations around the globe like Bluefield. Bluefield is the top performing out of all 33 locations around the world. They have the highest customer satisfaction, the lowest employee attrition. They have the best cost to serve, and the list goes on and on and on. And by the way, number 2, 3, 4, and 5 are those other ones that opened up in Hazard, Kentucky, and Wise, Virginia, and those kinds of locations as well. So that's causing people to raise their head and say, what is going on in Appalachia? And then you add to it the remote worker program, which is about to go live, where we're going to be advertising all these great gifts and benefits for people to come and live in our state. And we know what's going to happen is they're going to start calling their fellow workers and say, you've got to move here too. And I think that flywheel is going to kick in. So what we have to do is just be West Virginians, be welcoming to those who want to come in from the outside and show them what we're capable of. And the rest of it's going to take care of itself.
Perfect. Couldn't agree with you more. And I do believe we have the capability of totally shifting our economy based on that. So just changing gears for a moment, and I know we'd like to probably save a little time for some Q&A, and I think Joe Justice is going to manage those questions for us. So tell us about one of your latest endeavors with the Wing to Wing Foundation.
Well, thank you, Michael, for giving me that opportunity. As you mentioned, my wife and I started this foundation several years ago, and it's based on the quote by Anatole France, which is, "We're all born angels with one wing, and the way we fly is beholden unto one another." And that's what I learned growing up in West Virginia in the community I was raised in, which actually was the home of the Tri-State Airport where the Marshall plane crash happened when I was 6. And I watched this community pull together and rise from the ashes and attain glory. And so our opportunities are, we focus on education, entrepreneurship, the environment, and then equality, gender equality. And it's an opportunity for us to come back and pay it forward for all the people who invested in us over the years when we were growing up. And right now, the most exciting program we have is the remote worker program, which there's a lot out there and you'll hear a lot more about. But it's basically the ability to invite these employees who can live anywhere they want and do their work to come to our communities. It's a 55 county community strong program, even though some cities will be named in the first group. We're creating an entire support structure that will work with the local mayors and the economic development groups in these communities, so everyone will benefit. And our hope is to attract people to move into the state while our education system is growing the next chapter of entrepreneurs. So we get a current set of talent plus the existing talent we have and those that we're growing in the future, and we can get this flywheel as a startup state going. There's a lot more coming, but we're super excited about it. And I think it's going to be an exciting chapter for the state.
Well, again, we're incredibly appreciative of your leadership in this area. And it's just so exciting. So very exciting.
Thank you.
Joe, do you have some questions for Brad?
Matter of fact, we do. Mr. Smith, thank you so much. I've got just a couple of questions in here, and if anyone has any other questions, we will try to get to as many as we can while we have Mr. Smith available. So first question right off the bat. With those 75% of young hopeful entrepreneurs, is there any path forward for the Young Entrepreneur Fund within the state? Most of the state entrepreneurial minds have very little available funds to help finance very early stages of startups. To that end, what can be done to provide more resources for those entrepreneurs?
Joe, first of all, please know Mr. Smith. It's just Brad from Canova, my friend, and it's great to see you. So thank you for the question. Secondly, it's interesting. This is one of these differences also when I've been out in the Valley that I've recognized from other parts of the world that I've had the chance to spend time in, is we always ask the question, well, how many people did it take to found eBay? And it was one, it was Pierre, and he had nothing. And then we say, well, how many founded Google? And it was Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and they were 2 students, and they didn't have any money to start anything. And there's a whole bunch of examples that we share when we teach design thinking of the different kinds of experiments you can run. And there are 6 in particular, and 5 have 0 cost. If I told you the story of how they developed the premise for how Google could organize the world's information, you would die laughing, because it was Larry Page turning a textbook, Marissa Meyer leaning over him, taking a picture of every page, and Sergey Brin holding a stopwatch. And they figured out if they could take pictures of every page at a certain pace, they would be able to digitize the Library of Congress. And that gave them enough evidence to go get some money. So the point of all this is it's important to be scrappy. In the Silicon Valley, we say startups do not die of starvation. They die of indigestion. They have too much resource. So I'm encouraging you to not think about what you don't have in terms of funding. Think about how you can use a scrappy approach to get some sort of in-market evidence to demonstrate your idea works, and then go ask someone who has the funds. And you heard from a lot of investors and venture capitalists earlier. And believe me, VCs have one goal: get a good return with the lowest risk. And the way you de-risk something is to run an experiment. So I know that I don't point you right now with this answer to a go to this place. What I'm pointing you to is inside to say, find a scrappy way to do it with no money. And believe me, money will follow a great idea.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad. The next question is, what area of entrepreneurship do you see as being a worthwhile investment in within this state?
Teaching everyone in every level of education design thinking. We didn't talk about design thinking, but it's got 3 aspects to it. Joe, the first is deep customer empathy. And this is where you don't do research. You actually go observe the customer. Everyone every year does a New Year's resolution. We're going on a diet. We're going to the gym. We're going to save money. And by February 23rd, 90% of all New Year's resolutions are broken. So you can't listen to what people say. You have to observe them. then come up with a customer problem statement as a part of this first step of deep customer empathy, and then figure out what it is the customer is looking for as a benefit. That is step one. Step two is go broad to go narrow. This is a Toyota production system technique, which is for every problem, come up with at least 7 ideas. It's called 7 to 1, 7 different ways to solve the problem, and test all 7. Steve Jobs was the master of this. I knew Steve. Our chairman of the board, Bill Campbell, was his lead director and best friend. Steve would have Johnny Ivy lay out all the iPhone models that were possible next models. And Steve would look at all these on tables, grab one and say, now give me 7 more like this. And then they would do it again. He'd say, okay, now this one, give me 7 more like this. So go broad to go narrow, lots of ideas. And then the third step is rapid experimentation. So if we could teach design thinking in all of our K through 12 and university school systems, deep customer empathy, go broad to go narrow, and then rapid experiments, I think that will ignite our entrepreneurial opportunities in the state.
That's really awesome. And I'll just say from a personal level, I've done a lot of research. I work at Advantage Technology. We're an IT company here in town. And I've done a lot of research and reading on Silicon Valley. And your personal stories are just great to hear. Very, very interesting because I've read some of those stories. So it's just great to hear firsthand like that.
Thank you, John.
There's another question that I think you kind of answered. Maybe you can go into a little bit more here. What does your ideation process look like beyond design thinking methodologies? Are there any rituals that you participate in to help you with your creative solutions or difficult problems to solve?
There are. I'll give you 2. If you set aside the design thinking methodology with the 3 steps I just walked through, which we train all 11,000 employees on, there are 2 other things we do. Once a year, I will pull up the entire company's nose of the plane, a metaphor, and I will sit down with members of the executive team or the board and come up with the 6 questions that keep me awake at night. How are young minds getting formed after the creation of the iPhone? How will artificial intelligence and machine learning impact our categories like accounting and finance? And then what we do is we form a 3-person team around each of those problems, and we send them out to basically do what we call an action learning project. They go out and do deep customer empathy. So they observe customers with this problem, or in this case, 7, 8, 9-year-olds who were born after the iPhone. They then go interview experts and the best wheel makers who've already been studying this problem and are further along the learning curve. And then they come back and they write a 6-page narrative, which was made famous by Amazon, where you literally fill it with facts per second, no hyperbole, and you lay out everything you saw, everything that's being tested and proven to work against this problem. And then you're asked to lay out 3 alternatives, not 7, but 3 that will solve that problem. And you have to tell us why you eliminated 2 of them before you make your presentation. That is a way for us to figure out where we're going to point our company in the next chapter. And it's amazing because that is how this company, after 38 years at Intuit, continues to operate as a startup. And then the second thing I would say that we do is we do a lot of shadowing. Once a quarter, I shadowed fellow CEOs. I would shadow Jeff Bezos. I shadowed A.G. Lafley at Procter & Gamble. I called Sheryl Sandberg and spent a day watching her. I would observe how she led her company, how she actually made decisions. I would type up notes at the end and say, this is what I saw, which they usually said, wow, I didn't know I did that. That's implicit. But then I would actually take those learnings back and build them into how I wanted to lead every day. And those are 2 different ways for us to keep ourselves on our toes.
Great. Do we have time for one more question? All right. I think we're bumping up against. So one more last question here, everyone. Thank you all for your questions. If we didn't get to it, I'm so sorry, but we do have limited time here today. So last question, all of the technology potential for West Virginia rests in our infrastructure and internet backbone. What path do you see for West Virginia to put us on equal footing, especially in regards to smaller communities?
I think this is the single biggest opportunity and the single biggest risk for the state. Everything else we talk about becomes obsolete if we don't have broadband connectivity in every house and every holler in West Virginia. I'm encouraged by a lot of the things that I see happening. I see the governor and others leaning in. I see the legislature working very hard at this. I see federal grants and RDOF coming in. I think we're going to have to take a very different approach. We don't have to invent it. There are other communities like Ammon, Idaho, and others that have solved this problem. But we have to do this because if we don't get broadband connectivity in every house and every holler, entrepreneurship is less viable. Remote work is almost obsolete. Forget telemedicine. Forget all the other things we're talking about. And so I think this is critical. And the answer lies in all the communities that have already done it. Eastern Kentucky, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Ammon, Idaho. We don't have to make it up. Let's go see what they did and let's make it a priority.
Great.
Well, Brad Smith and Mike Graney, thank you both so much for what a great way to wrap up day one of our venture fair. Just so many good ideas and inspiration, encouragement, and leadership. And I am personally grateful to both of you for your commitment to growing entrepreneurship in West Virginia and thereby growing our economy.